Hi, it's Dwyer. Always 1776.com, a free site. Also, money 1776.com, a free site. Today is August 10th, 2025. Nothing I say in this video should be construed as investment advice. It is being offered simply for entertainment purposes. Right? If I mention a stock, there is a significant chance that I either own it or am considering owning it. Trust no one. Do your own due diligence. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Folks, I've found in talking to people that we're all in a different place these days. This is one of those moments in time where we all have different understandings of the present. We all have different ideas on what the future is going to look like. My point to you is recognize the volatility, recognize the loose threads, right? There is very little consensus in what's happening right now. So, with a nod to the fact that the United States has something like a $37 trillion debt, let me just say I don't know how colleges survive going forward past, let's say, the next 5 years. Understand, colleges are expensive. You know, there was a time, the generation before my generation, where people could go to college, work while going to college, right? Have a job at a fast food restaurant or some local restaurant, work part-time, work during the summer, and leave college with very little debt. Right? Just understand, that time is firmly behind us. Now, most private colleges have tuitions and costs that are $50,000 or more. That's at a time when the average American family is making about $80,000 a year. More importantly, what they're teaching in college can't match artificial intelligence. Right? Looking back on my own life, I realized that none of the jobs that I had in my 20s are economically viable today. Who would hire a clerk to create research memos at a law firm if the customers know that all of that research can be done in a matter of minutes using AI? Right? Just understand, the world is very different today than it was just a few decades ago. We understand that information is cheaper now than it's ever been. That subscription services that you had to pay an arm and a leg for in the past have been surpassed by what's available now in the public domain using AI. Right? Let me also point out too that universities have a lot of overhead. The idea was that they wanted you in a freshman dorm so you would meet your classmates. That would maximize your networking opportunities, which is a big part of going to college. Right? You'd actually get to meet people. You'd get to make friends. That friendship would ingratiate you and your friends to the campus community for the duration of your life. Right? Now, truth be told, I still have season tickets to my alma mater. Right? I'm going to go watch football games when college football season opens. Right? That world worked for that world. But now the prices of being on campus are so expensive. Right? Students really can't afford the dorm room anymore. More importantly, you have an alternative. You have remote learning. In other words, put a camera in the classroom, and now I can be a student, but I can be learning from my home. I can listen to the lecture, the same lecture the people in the classroom are hearing in real time. But I could do so looking at my laptop. Right? Just understand that, just like you could work remotely. We learned that during the COVID era. Well, you could work remotely as a student today. So now, many would-be applicants to these universities are asking hard questions. While it would be great to meet my classmates, while it would be great to be on campus, to live a student life, to hit the frat party, right, to go out and hit the local restaurants, make lifetime friendships, can I afford it? Can't I still attend the university remotely, saving the costs of being on campus? Right? Can't I, rather than spend the money buying the books, can't I instead have access to a database that has the books already there? Let's save the trees. More importantly, let's protect students' limited financial resources. Let me also say, too, that colleges are going to have to start making hard decisions. Some of these schools are going to look around, particularly private schools, and they're going to say, you know what, this land that we own, it's worth a lot of money. We're having a hard time balancing our books. What if we come up with an arrangement where we sell this building to the local town? Use the money to pay down some of our debt burden. Because, of course, over-encumbered alumni are no longer making the same level of donation that they did in the past. So let's just say, folks, we're in flux. When I was a kid, you knew that college existed and that college was supposedly a good thing. Now people are openly asking the question, including entrepreneurs like Peter Thiel, right, who's a law school graduate. He went to college, he went to grad school. They're asking the question of whether or not college is even worth it. Understand, some employers, Google for example, now has classes people can take online to try to get jobs at Google. Right? 22, 23-year-olds are asking themselves, wow, is being $150,000 in debt at a time when most jobs are short-term? In other words, the idea of working for one employer for 30 years, getting a pension, getting a gold watch, that's as remote as it's ever been. You don't even know if the company's going to be there in 30 years. There's an understanding today that capitalist economies have creative creation as well as creative destruction. Right? There are a whole line of companies that you thought were going to rule the roost. Right? MySpace, Friendster, AOL, who now are marginal players to the extent they exist at all. Let's talk about a second idea. And let me point out, too, this is an interactive forum. You don't have to agree with these ideas. In the comment section, you tell me where you disagree or where you agree. Right? But let's just say, I know there are a lot of families right now looking at their 16-year-old and asking themselves privately some hard questions. If I send this 16-year-old to college, are they going to make the most of it? Is it worth going more than $100,000 in debt to send the 16-year-old to college? right? Should I instead be suggesting things like the armed services, the military, or, you know, should I take the laboring oar and say, look, Google has these programs where you can get certified? Or look, there are these universities that actually offer online learning that would enable us to save on the cost of, your college. You wouldn't have to travel to a campus and have mom and I spend all this money on a career that might be disintermediated in short order by artificial intelligence. What schools are going to have to do, too, and I know this sounds preposterous, right? Sometimes technological progress sounds preposterous. What schools are going to have to do is they're going to have to come up with ways to allow alumni to meet people nearby virtually, right? In other words, if the idea of the freshman dorm was, hey, let's get people on campus so they actually have a college experience, which furthers our college brand, right? Just understand an analog of that would be, okay, look, we have people living in San Jose, California, right? Let's have online communities set up where they can interface in virtual student lounge at their discretion, maybe even attend virtual parties. Isn't this the direction Meta was going in with the metaverse years ago? Maybe that idea is going to be revived because students can save a lot of money, and it's a lot safer to socialize from the comfort of your home office and laptop than it is meeting strangers in strange places. And maybe the networking can actually help careers later. If I meet, Joe and Jerry on some campus sponsored, room, some private equivalent of X or TikTok, right? Where, we can talk, we can exchange ideas, we can become friends remotely at lower cost than it would cost us to be friends on campus. Let's talk about the second idea here. This one's going to be controversial. Remember, this is just one man's opinion. Bitcoin maximalism is now a dated idea that loses more relevance every day. Right? Understand, Bitcoin's the granddaddy of cryptocurrency. Right? Bitcoin maximalists, Max Kaiser, for example, Adam Back, for example, they were of the mindset that it's Bitcoin or nothing. Right? Investing in these other cryptos was too speculative. Only Bitcoin was going to survive long term. Only Bitcoin was going to be accepted by merchants and develop ecosystems where it's used as a store of value method of payment. Folks, in a few days, Donald Trump, the President of the United States, who himself owns altcoins, is going to push for the legalization of retirement accounts. Are there more sacred accounts in the United States? More sacred financial accounts, right? He's going to push for retirement accounts to legally be able to invest in cryptocurrency, including altcoins. In other words, you have a lot of people who are depending on pension funds and other funds for their retirement years, their financial solvency. Understand that the United States government is about to allow you to invest your retirement funds in crypto. including altcoins. Bitcoin has a bigger problem. And I say this as someone who owns Bitcoin, who has been on here online talking about Bitcoin and crypto for years. Just Google Dwyer, Bitcoin, Xcoin. I've been talking about altcoin for years. Xcoin became Dash. And you'll see videos pop up from more than 5 years ago, right? Um, I just need for people to understand that the world has changed. I understand there are Bitcoin treasury companies. I understand there's a lot of, excitement over what strategy is doing. I own some shares of strategy, right? Over time, though, folks, my portfolio is going to change because Bitcoin doesn't have the level of smart contract capability that other digital assets have. Understand, these decentralized applications have given rise to stablecoins, for example, which now are so embedded in American life that Tether's former attorney is now Donald Trump's Commerce Secretary. Right, folks? Follow what government has embraced. There's a spectacular investor. I've never met him. My motto is be careful in meeting your mentors, right? I've met some guys who, I idolized when I was a kid. I had one poster on my wall, right? Two, actually, over the years. One was Jim Plunkett by chance. I ended up going to Jim Plunkett's alma mater. Another was O.J. Simpson, right? And all I can say is be careful when you pick mentors. Be careful when you meet them, right? I met a baseball great at an airport. He was one of my father's favorite players, right? My father told me that this was a guy I should model myself after, right? My father would pick out, guys who he respected greatly, and he would say, Rich, that's a guy you want to admire. I met him, was literally 2 feet away from him. And let's just say, while I'm glad I met him, he wasn't the overwhelming figure that I thought he would be in person. Well, one of my mentors, guy I've never met but who I admire greatly, is Jim Rogers, right? Rogers, true to form, is online free of cost, offering financial wisdom to YouTube viewers, right? This is a great guy. And Rogers, when Bitcoin first dropped, was skeptical. He said, look, flatly, government doesn't want competition in terms of there being some alternate method of payment out there. Government wants a monopoly on things like currency, money, right? Government, if you have money, government wants to believe that you have the money with government's permission. So Rogers would talk about history and would talk about how historically people would trade things like seashells and stuff like that. They would barter using different products. And of course, governments, the United States government, the British government, would come in and outlaw such transactions. It was treason if you did a transaction on British soil using anything other than British currency. Folks, we're past that point now. The President of the United States is an altcoin holder. Understand, retirement accounts are in disarray. They need help. Let me let you in on a secret. Some cryptocurrencies retain value better than the US dollar. Right? Nixon delinked the dollar from gold. The US dollar, a fiat currency, has been rapidly depreciating in value ever since. The move to actually enable retirement accounts to invest in cryptocurrency is actually intended to save retirement accounts. That's how much of a 180 the world has done. So, government has embraced the smart contract capability of altcoins. Right? Government has embraced stable coins which can only exist using that smart contract capability. So, short term, pensions will flock to Bitcoin. Bitcoin will get a further boost because Bitcoin is the oldest crypto. Because we intuitively understand that the people running pension funds are not the Jim Rogerses of the world, the Ray Dalios of the world, the Paul Tudor Joneses of the world, the Stanley Druckenmillers of the world. They're not the world's sharpest financial minds. Right? Rather, often they're political beneficiaries who have gotten the job because they've played the corporate game. They've played the political game. They know that their pension funds are underfunded. They understand that. They know that they need to find a way to boost them. But they know the stock market is overbought. They know that looking at the Buffett indicator. Right? They understand that there's pressure for them to diversify into cryptocurrencies. That's the world we live in now. Right? People see these Bitcoin treasury companies like Strategy taking off in market value. Right? There's pressure, but they don't know altcoins well enough to trust them at this point. So they're going to go with the crypto that they have political cover on. And that's Bitcoin. Right? It's the granddaddy of them all. This isn't a crypto that got developed in the last few years. Right? So understand, short term, Bitcoin's going to have a boost. Longer term, Bitcoin will be slowly disintermediated by more advanced crypto. You're going to have people running pension funds who are actually going to be prepared for the job because they were raised in the age of crypto. They're going to know the difference between proof of work and proof of stake and proof of history. Right? They're going to understand the DeFi world. They're going to understand that cryptos like Aave, one of Mark Cuban's favorites, by the way, that's billionaire Mark Cuban, actually have a real world purpose. So let me just say, the world's changing fast. I know there's a Bitcoin maximalist community out there, and they're some of the most esteemed people in the digital asset world. Right, folks? I'd be careful paying a premium for Bitcoin over some of the newer altcoins. Don't get me wrong, I believe conservatively 90 to 95% of all cryptos are going to fail. But I also recognize that there's that 5% that might outperform Bitcoin. Let's talk about housing. Folks, thank God for the housing downturn. What good is housing if people who want to start a family can't buy a house. Right now, we made mistakes. History is written by the winners. Understand, we're going to go back and we're going to reevaluate all of our recent leaders. Right? But we made a mistake in the past where there was a housing downturn, and then our U.S. government, which is a step behind most of the time, which understands that giving out candy is the way to get people addicted to sugar. Right? Just understand, our government stepped in and decided they were going to not let the housing market clear. Rather, they were going to save distressed homeowners. Right, folks? I need for everyone watching this video, and understand, my view is that the world's a hard place. I need for everyone watching this video to understand that that carries a cost. If there's a housing downturn, because guess what? The demand is not there at the current price level. You can let a market correct so that the prices drop to a level where there is demand. In my world, that's sustainable. Or you can try to prop up the price point at which there's little demand in an effort to ingratiate yourself to current homeowners. That's the path that some administrations took. I'm not even going to name them. Folks, that's given us the perilous situation you have now, where you have entire parts of Florida, for example, where, folks are going to have to ultimately either accept the fact that they're paying more than market for the house they have, or sell the house and realize the losses on the property they had. Right? Sooner or later, the federal government had to realize that it was $37 trillion in debt, that it couldn't buy votes of current homeowners by protecting their investments. Understand, housing is an investment. Are we going to reach a point now where we're going to tell a group of investors, hey, your investment is special. We're going to give it preferential treatment, while all these people over here are losing money in Wall Street. Right? While all these money over there, while all these people over there are losing money in their business, right? While we're shutting down businesses, we're telling restaurants during the COVID era, you can't operate. While we're telling landlords in places like Los Angeles, you can't evict non-paying tenants during the COVID era. With housing, it's been so protected that we were giving tax breaks. We were subsidizing the purchase of homes. And then we were keeping prices propped up as market conditions changed. Folks, simply put, that's not sustainable. Let's go one step further, too. That legal structure has led to a lot of malinvestment, right? In the real world, the size of the average American household has been shrinking. In 1980, it was 2.76. In 2023, it's 2.51. But yet, people are out there building mansions, right? Subsidized by you, the taxpayer. Think about how preposterous that was. Right? Understand, in Florida, people were buying condos overlooking things like hurricane risks. Right? I'm positive that many condo owners right now are dealing with expenses, condo fees that are being readjusted. Folks, if you're buying a condo in places like Florida, you have to take a step back now. And you have to figure out what it says on the books. What does the condo board owe? Understand the situation in Southern California, Pacific Palisades. They had a fire. These are wealthy people versus the median income folks in the United States. These are wealthy people, right? These are people over by the water, right? Many of them, folks with means, after the fire raged through Pacific Palisades, were underinsured to rebuild. Everyone was saving on insurance. The insurance market was inadequate to actually allow the house they had to be rebuilt. So I need for folks to understand that our relationship to housing, given our reality, right? Government pulling back on the subsidy, the growing recognition that if you make a bad home purchase, you're at risk. Government's not going to come in to save you. Savvier voters who have to start realizing, the government really is insolvent. We don't have the money to pay the debt right now. Why would we subsidize homeowners? Is it a wise idea to keep the price of a home propped up when young people can't even afford the home? Right? I know there are many people upset that Wall Street is stepping in, Blackstone is stepping in and is buying up a lot of homes. Their argument is, wow, that increases the volatility. Right? Wasn't one of the reasons you bought a house in a neighborhood the idea that it was an investment backed by land, that it wouldn't be as volatile as the rest of the economy? Aren't you at risk if some Wall Street entity owns 20% of the houses in your area? Aren't you at risk of them deciding, hey, this no longer works for us, we're going to sell the 20% of homes we have? Isn't that going to cause volatility in the local market? The answer is absolutely. You need to view housing as a volatile investment. If you're going to be an investor in the space, you, not the government, you need to recognize all the risk involved. Right? So some politicians have some ideas about preventing Wall Street from being involved in buying a lot of houses. Why would you do that? Those efforts will fail in part because the demand from Wall Street helps drive up real estate prices, making the investment attractive to third parties. But understand, if you're an investor in the space, you're the one who should assume the risk, not young people who can't afford the house. So let's just say, also the opportunity costs now are apparent. Every young person has friends who will say, man, I didn't even know what I was investing in when I invested in Solana. And now I'm a fat cat. Now Solana has given me savings. Now that investment years ago in Bitcoin, that's gotten me savings. Right? Understand. Young people now are understanding the idea of an opportunity cost, which my generation didn't understand. Right? If my money is tied up in a house that is appreciating in value by 2%, right? Now, we know there's leverage involved, right? You're only buying 10 to 20% of the house as a pay down. You're financing the rest, right? Many people got great mortgages at 3%, 4%, not that long ago. right? So they're making big money off the financing of their house. That's different than making money off the house itself, right? I know it's challenging to think of it that way. But just understand, many people who were making money off housing in the past were making money off the financing and off the demographics, the baby boom generation, the huge bump up in demand that generation provided to the market. Folks, those days are over. Baby boomers are dying off, right? Those days are over. So now that potential home buyers are realizing what they're giving up by buying the house, right? A house that might go up in value, might go down in value, as it is in places like Florida, right? Parts of Texas right now. Um, Now people are saying, I can rent in the same neighborhood. After all, in my household, there were only 2.51 of us, right? Me, my girl, and half of a child on average. Do we even need a house? We don't need that big of a house. I don't need to, go into debt here. Can't we rent in the same neighborhood and also have exposure to Bitcoin, some, very promising cryptocurrency, some very promising AI stock, some very promising stock that benefits from the explosion in AI, whether that's an energy company or whether that's a data center builder. U.S. is upside down right now in terms of its energy needs. Some stock in the modular nuclear plant space. Right? Why do I want to walk away from that upside? Simply to own a home in an area where I could rent and not be subject to the level of volatility and risk that's inherent in owning the house. Right? So think it through, folks. In my eyes, this is an era of big change. Right? It's going to take years for the Pacific Palisades part of Los Angeles to rebuild itself. And when it does, people are going to be mindful of the fact that the entire community could go up in smoke again. Right? It's going to take years for the debt and past expenses that now are embedded in Florida's condo market to completely alleviate itself. Right? Understand, some of these buildings were older buildings. People were saving money because the condo board wasn't spending the money to properly upkeep the building. Right? Once you pull the plug on housing, as we know from 2008, it takes years for the market to recover. Right? Understand too, the situation's been so fluid that you had the COVID lockdown, then you had people saying, hey, I'm moving out of California. I'm going to move someplace else. Right? I've always wanted more of a backyard. I've always wanted a view of hills, a view of the water, whatever. They moved to places like Colorado. Right, folks? I want folks to study the housing market right now in cities like Denver. Right, folks? You have employers saying, hey, come back to the office. Who knows how long that's going to last? It's basically come back to the office while you have a job before you get disintermediated by artificial intelligence. Right? But just understand that you have people who moved out of California now returning to California, in part out of recognition that the economy out here has some big players in the space, right? Meta, located in Northern California. Netflix, located in Northern California. Google, located in Northern California. Apple, located in Northern California, right? You have businesses here that can pay more than some other areas. So cities like Austin, cities like Denver, you're now realizing how fragile the real estate markets are there. Right? People in Vegas are panicked because, of course, Vegas depends on tourism. And the tourism market has really been negatively impacted by the growing consensus that we're on the verge of a recession. People are cutting their discretionary spending. When they go on vacation, they don't want to go someplace where the premise is, okay, now that you're here, you're going to gamble away the remaining money you have. Right? They're like, whoa, Vegas is too expensive. I'd rather go on a cruise. Right? Hey, let's cut the costs somewhat. Instead of a vacation, let's have a staycation. Right? That's where we are right now in the world, folks. Things are changing quickly. Those are my thoughts. Let me hear yours in the comments section of this YouTube video. Thanks for stopping by.